We've been wanting to do this podcast deal for a long time, Don, and I couldn't honestly think of a better way to kick this deal off than with Big Daddy Don Garlits. I sat down and I started writing down a list, like, who could I get on this show? Who could I do this with? And I've thought back. I've been blessed to have had a lot of conversations with you that go all over, and I've thought to myself, man, I wish I would have been recording some of those. Like, and I guess both of us probably are glad I wasn't recording all of them, but I kind of I kind of wish that I would have been. And that said, I appreciate you taking the time to do this because it means a lot to me, and I think about the conversations we've had, and I guess I know people need to hear them. Don, you have been all around the world. You've seen so many things, and I think it's especially the new folks that are coming into drag racing, and some of the people that have been here for a long time and supported the sport for years and years and years. You've got such an interesting perspective, and I don't know that it often gets laid out. It's normally little sound bites. Here's one thing Don said. A 10-second sound bite when you didn't get to tell the whole story. So I'm excited to have the opportunity today to kind of get the whole story. How are you?
I'm great. I feel good, and I still got a mind that's operating. That's the main thing. Boy, a mind is a terrible thing to lose.
Well, I'm glad that's the case. How old are you, Don?
I'll be 86 on January the 14th, 2018.
Wow. You look like $1 million these days. What's the secret?
Hard work, eat right. I get that from my dad. He goes into health back into the 30s when it wasn't fashionable, and I went through a down period when my wife died of we were married 61 years, and that was pretty much of a downstroke for me. But I found this new young lady that liked me, and it brought me back to life.
It's amazing how having something to kind of keep you going, how big of a difference that can make. You've always kept yourself busy, but having someone to kind of share that with, I'm very happy for you, Don. I mean, and what a sweetheart.
Yeah, it's important. I mean, you got to have two things. You need a partner that likes to do things and get out and about and has interest in your hobbies and vocation, and you need something to do that you feel like it means something. And of course, the museum was a wonderful thing that I never realized it was going to be that when I got older, But it has turned into something that I can do and want to do and can see the work that I've done. And it's so fulfilling. And that's what you got. You don't ever want to think that you're done. Because if you do, you are done.
I believe that. I believe that. And I hate to say it, but you see it sometimes when you can tell people have kind of resigned. Their health started to fail them a little bit, and they didn't have something to keep them going, to keep moving forward. And it seems like when that switch is flipped, they deteriorate rather rapidly.
Oh, it's unbelievable. I've had so many of my friends that didn't, not in drag racing, but outside of the sport, and most particular the ones that work for government that get pensioned off at 55 to 60. They don't last long.
Right.
It's unbelievable.
It is. It's sad,
Yep.
But it's all the more important that I'm so appreciative, Don, that we were able to get you on here. And there's so much to talk about. It's hard to know where to begin, but just based on kind of what we were talking about before we went live with this interview was one of the things that we're both kind of hopelessly romantic about the sport of drag racing. We see it. I think we both have consistently seen the sport through rose-colored glasses, and I think that's an important thing. We need positivity. We need people to be upbeat about the sport. And we've talked about some of the challenges that the sport of drag racing faces, and there's some of the things you've told me in the past that I'd like for us to touch on here is how important, I guess, it is that there's like a star out front. And there's something that concerns me talking about, people aging and things like that. Kind of the star of the drag racing show, I guess, without question, is John Force. And there have been times in recent years that I've wondered aloud, what is the NHRA's plan after this? Who can they thrust into the spotlight here? And it's been interesting because, as you've told me, putting someone out front really hasn't ever been part of the plan for the NHRA. I mean, you can attest to that, right?
Well, yes, I can. More today than ever before. When Wally was in complete control, this was one of the things that we really butted heads about. I believe that the guys' names, because it was all guys and there wasn't any women yet, this is before Shirley, this was actually what we should be promoting. Chris Karamessinas, Don Perdome, Don Garlits, and et cetera. And Wally said, quote unquote, and this, he told a lot of people this, he says, the cars are the stars. And he was so wrong about that. Everything else about the sport, he was right. I mean, he did so much for it. It's unbelievable. But I, in my heart, believe that drag racing could be just as big as NASCAR had we got our foot in the door earlier about creating these huge personalities and putting that out front instead of the cars. And here's a prime example. Way back in the, I think it was the late 60s or the early 70s at Gainesville, I went up to the control to see how the qualifying was going, and we'd had a session of qualifying. And I looked at the thing to see where my name was and where the different ones were. And a guy says to me, who is this one right here, 323? I said, that's Karamessinas. But there was no name. It was just the car number.
Wow.
And then another guy asked me. So I took my pen out and I wrote the names out on the qualifying sheet. There was a little blank spot there because the number don't take up much space,
right.
And then it would go out and it would give you the ET and the speed. And it was according to the ETs how they were arranged. That with the number one ET was the number one. And there was maybe 25 people on that list. And so I filled in the names, the ones that I knew. There was a couple I didn't know, but I knew most of them. And a little while later, attention in the pits, attention in the pits. Don Garlits report to the tower immediately. Don Garlits report to the tower. And so I go up to the tower and they've got that sheet up there. And they said, did you write these names on this sheet? I said, yeah, I did. They said, why did you do that? I said, well, I was up there looking at it and everybody was asking me who the names were, who the numbers were. So I thought I'd just fill the names in because it should have the names on there. They said, no, it shouldn't have the names on there. We're not promoting that. If they want to find out who these people are, they can buy a program because all the entries are in there with the numbers and the names.
You got in trouble?
They said, if you do that again, you'll be sent home. You'll be disqualified for this event.
Wow.
That speaks volumes of what we're talking about here.
I mean, was there I remember one time you told me that it felt like there was a fork in the road or something where NASCAR kind of knew that they had to celebrate these personalities and put these drivers kind of on display front and center. And there was this fork in the road, and NASCAR went left, and drag racing, NHRA went right. Is that a good way to phrase it?
Yeah, and at the same time, NASCAR was also decided that paying a lot of money made a lot of difference. I mean, they were paying as much as $10,000 to win a race, And so they got onto that, and of course that always gets everybody's attention that this is important because you're making a lot of money. And we went clear into the 70s and the big burn down at 1971, and the NHRA Nationals at Indianapolis was still paying $3,000 to win the entire event. And that's what got that PRO started, because I went to Wally. I said, Wally, Steve Carbone should have walked out of there with $25,000, not 3,000. And he says to me, this was at the banquet in Atlanta, the Division II banquet. He said, Don, he said, when drag racing pays $25,000, he says, hell will be frozen over. He says, that's light years away. And I said, no, it isn't. I said, because if you won't do it, I'll do it myself this coming Labor Day. Oh, he just laughed in my face. And we did. We paid $25,000 out of the cash plus the contingency. Every one of those three drivers, Pro Stock, Funny Car, and Top Fuel, walked out of Tulsa with the lowest one was $37,000 and the highest one was $39,000.
Wow.
Not too bad.
Not too bad. I mean, why do you think, what was their reservation? I mean, because I think that if you look at, I mean, it's not just motorsports. If you look at stick and ball sports, football, baseball, basketball, it seems like those sports as a business are well aware that you kind of need a Michael Jordan. He'll elevate the entire sport. His fan following is good for basketball. What do you think? What was the disconnect?
Okay, I'm going to defend Wally for just a minute.
No, that's great.
Here. What he actually thought in his mind, and he was somewhat right, he did not want big money getting into drag racing. It was supposed to be for the little guys, the sportsmen. Build your stuff at the junkyard and come out and race and still have your regular job. It wasn't about making money. It was about entertainment and ingenuity. In fact, they used to say that ingenuity in action, be able to get all these pieces out of the junkyard like Swamp Rat 1 and put it together and have a world championship car. And if he got the big money in it, and he said it a couple of times as it began to get bigger and grow, he said, this money's not good. And the truth of the matter is, look at it now, 3 teams control the entire sport of drag racing, and it's all about the money. He was right about that. And I don't know what the answer to it is. I just don't know.
Well, a couple of things. I mean, I agree, and it's most assuredly about the money. And I suppose we can come back to this. We can switch gears here a little bit. But it's tough because it's very much about the money right now. But I wonder if more money would be available to more people if we had been promoting superstars and promoting celebrity drivers for years and years and years now, because it seems like the only guys that can demand the sponsorship dollars or command the sponsorship dollars that it takes to run at the front right now are guys that have gone out of their way to build some name value, right? Force and Connie Coletta and Don Schumacher, those are guys that are kind of still riding on their name value decades after they've quit drag racing. If I wonder, I guess, if NHRA would have been trying to celebrate stars earlier on and putting these guys out front, maybe there'd be more money right now. Maybe there'd be more sponsors that want to be involved.
It could well be. In other words, if they had been staying on the name deal and way back when it made a lot of difference. In other words, I used to just complain about they didn't put somebody's picture on the front of National Dragster instead of the damn car. And, to build the recognition of the face and everything. And, of course, they do that now, but there was a time when that was absolutely forbidden. There only could be cars on the front page of National Dragster. And maybe had they done that, because NASCAR, everybody can get sponsors out there. It's amazing.
Right.
I mean, some of them don't get so much, but there's a lot of big sponsors involved in NASCAR. So more than one driver has access to the money.
I agree. I mean, and I got to tell you, a little shameless plug here, is that you're exactly right. I mean, the whole reason we started Drag Illustrated 12 years ago was that we felt like somebody had to put faces to the names. Like we knew the names that were in vinyl on the Lexan windows of the sides of these race cars, but nobody knew what anyone looked like or nobody knew anybody's story. And that was really, I mean, I'm kind of thankful the NHRA was so slow moving on that, because had they moved quicker, we may not exist today. Drag Illustrated may not exist because I feel like the cornerstone of what our business has been about, what our magazine's been about, is putting faces to the names and telling the stories of these racers that need to be told. And so because it's funny, man. Drag Illustrated, we're on the other side of it completely. We've had less than 12 issues out of the 129, I think, that we've sent to print that haven't had a human face on the cover.
Yeah, that's the way to go. Here's another little mistake that's being made. You can't find the driver's name on the car from the stands. And this is important. I was set up in the stands, and they'll say, "Who is that guy right there?" Well, I don't know. That's a new paint job. I can't tell. And the fans are crying out to know who is actually driving the car. And in our day, see, the sponsor got second billing, the driver got number one billing, and that was so good. Look at all my cars in the museum. Don Garlits is the big name. And it wasn't until the 80s that then the sponsor started demanding that the name be bigger, like the Kendall cars, see. And it wasn't good. But I always kept my name out there where you could still read it. Today, you have a hard time finding the driver's name on the car sitting in the stands.
Well, I mean, yeah, and every car of yours, every Swamp Rat, your name is prominent. Even on the cars that you didn't race for very long or very frequently. I'm looking through a bunch of pictures right here, and it's like Don Garlits. You had that thing, your name front and center on every one of them.
Yeah, I was told early on about that. Ray Giovanni taught me that. I had Don Speed Chop. He said, "You don't want Don Speed Chop on the car." He says, "You want Don Garlits." He says, "There's a dozen Don Speed Chops." He says, "There's only one Don Garlits." And he says, "And you want your cars, you want it with it nice, plain block letters, no funny deal, so every picture that's clicked, they know exactly who it is."
And it's worked, right? I mean, you have to admit that it's worked. It's worked. Well, a couple of things. I definitely want to talk about the money that's shown up in drag racing, but while we're on the subject of names, when did you first realize that you could make a living out of this deal? That Don Garlits, Big Daddy Don Garlits, was more than just a guy that was throwing together hot rods. That you were becoming a part of, pop culture. You were a drag racing celebrity, a motorsports celebrity. When did all that start to click, and you realized that you kind of needed to take this to the moon?
It was 1964. When the 64 season opened, I had enough appearances, and they were high dollar enough that I didn't need to work in the shop anymore. I could just tour the car and make good money as long as I didn't blow up a lot of engines. In other words, if I could get some use out of the engines, I could make money with drag racing. And so I let my brother Ed run the shop, and I went out on the road for a whole summer.
Did I lose you?
Did you hear me?
Yeah, you went out on the road for a whole summer, and that was.
Yeah, and Ed ran the shop, and I made good money. I made good money that year, 1964. And and of course I won the nationals, and I went to England on the U.S. drag team, and it all just that was the year I went 200 miles an hour officially NHRA. And it was a real good year, and I realized that my wife and I splurged and bought a color TV.
And you knew you made it.
Yeah.
Did you?
Well,
how
they
quickly
paid
did they?
me to show up in '58 at a race in Texas, but it just wasn't enough money at that point per show. And it was spasmodic, it wasn't steady like the 1964. I actually had a full run every week schedule.
Did you? What did it pay to get booked in 1958 or 1964? I guess whenever you were doing a lot of it.
Well, the first one was $450, and in
Wow.
'64 they were paying me like $750 to show up.
And whenever back then, what did a match race booking look like? Did you come in and just make a couple, two, three runs, or how did it work?
Yeah, it was a 2 out of 3, and lots of times if you ran 1, 2 straight, you didn't have to make the third one. But most tracks did want the third run.
Right.
And so what I usually did, I always let the guy have the best lane to start with. If it was usually a lot of times it's a 2-lane racetrack, and then I'd take the good lane for the second run, and the low ET guy would then have the choice for the third, and that was kind of an advantage because I got the bad lane to start with, and the other guy got the good lane right off the bat. But then I got a little tune-up on my car, and I knew I'd move into the good lane the next run, and I would probably always set low ET then on the second run, and then that would give me the good lane for the final.
Right. That makes sense. Yeah. I mean, you had a strategy to it even way back then. How much, whenever the match racing deal was coming together and you could book a full tour, what was going through your mind? I mean, did you have any idea then where this could maybe go? Or was it just, I'm going to see how long this lasts?
I never figured it to be long term. I always thought that this whole thing was not going to be because drag racing started out was so unacceptable. My God, drag racers were not held in high esteem in the 50s and even into the 60s. And so I always thought maybe I'd hurt myself, or maybe I'd get tired of it, or whatever. So that's why I always had a business. I had the Don Speed Shop, I had Don's Garage, I had Don Garlits High Performance World, and then the museum. All of this morphed into the museum, all these companies.
I've always been blown away that, I mean, it's to see how long this has lasted, and that the thing that scares me sometimes is that you haven't, been on the NHRA tour routinely for years and years and years, yet you still remain probably the most recognizable name our sport has to offer. And that's one of the things that, I mean, not to go backwards with our conversation, but it really does kind of concern me because I know there are tons of young, talented guys out there and gals, excuse me, lots of really incredible personalities and really talented young people that could maybe be the next Don Garlits, but I don't know that we're really, I get worried because I feel like as a sport, as a whole, I feel like we're just kind of resting on our laurels a little bit. We're kind of waiting to see how far John Force can take us, basically. And it doesn't feel like there's a strong contingency plan.
Well, I don't think there is a plan. I think it's just a day-to-day deal. I think they just kind of plan on what we're going to do next year, and that's about the size of it. I mean, that's a gut feeling I get from it.
Yeah, same here.
And this damn thing is so expensive. I mean, let's just take a particular one. I mean, I really like Anton Brown. That's one of my favorites. He's a nice, well-spoken, soft-spoken guy that does well.
Agreed.
I mean, he's not arrogant and self-centered or none of that stuff. He's just a really all-around good guy. And if he didn't have the ride and he tried to put a program together for himself, it'd be virtually impossible. I mean, it's so complicated now. You got to have so much help. There's got to be people that manage this end of it, and manage the parts, and look at the equipment that it takes to really do it right. I mean, my God, they make their own heads, they make their own cranks, they make everything. And, a guy like, it should be that where a guy like Anton Brown could just decide to go on his own and get the sponsorship and go. But he can't. I don't think he can. I think he's locked into doing just whatever he does. And so that's by the will of Don Schumacher.
I think you're right.
If he decides to quit next week, what happens?
Yeah, I think you're exactly right, and that's a scary, sad thing, really, if you think about it. It's a sad state of affairs that there's a chance that a guy like Antron could be sitting on the sidelines. I mean, what do you think?
Look at Art Malone. Here's a good example. Art Malone drove for me when I was burned in '59, and he only drove about 1 year, and he said, I'm quitting. I'm going to do my own thing. And he went out to Kansas to Al Williams' shop. He built a dragster, and he was right there. He was top of the line. I mean, he won Bakersfield in 1963, and I mean, he was just good, and he was able to do it. It didn't take millions and millions of dollars to do it. Not a million won't even smell it anymore. You got to have so much stuff.
What do you think? We talked one time, Don, about the way they run these engines, and I think it's an amazing story. Could you tell us a little bit about whenever you came back and made your return to Top Fuel, and the way you went about running your program? I think is very interesting, and I wonder if there's not something that the sport can learn from that. Take us back to when you were coming back, and I know you put together, I think, 3 complete bullets. Is that correct? To go run?
Actually, I had 4 altogether.
Okay.
4 complete aluminum engines, billet blocks and billet heads. And I still got all 4 of them. And I got all the cylinder heads. Nothing was destroyed. And I never put oil on the drag strip in a 2-year period, but I only qualified once. It speaks volumes. And I missed qualifying by just a few thousandths a couple of times, 2 and 3 thousandths of a second. And the guy that put me out, like particularly at Indy, blew the engine on the run that put me out of the show, and he couldn't even return for the first round the next day because he had no parts left. See, I'm against all of that. I don't believe that we should be able to let the parts control the event. In other words, the guys should be in control of the event who's running the stuff. And, I also think we should go back to quarter-mile racing for the Top Fuel cars.
I agree. Tell me, is it? I think that something that is lost on people is that you don't have a machine shop cranking out parts by the minute. I mean, you built those 4 engines yourself, correct?
Yes, I did.
I mean, so is there like a certain romance that you have? I mean, is there a certain romance? There's a relationship you have with those engines, right? I mean, you can't probably stand
They
to
were
destroy
my
them.
babies. I loved each one of them, and they were put together with my own 2 hands, and I certainly didn't want to throw them down on the drag strip to go a thousandth of a second quicker. I tuned it to where I could tune it, and then that was it. But my engines were still all good. I never put a rod out of one, none of that stuff. But today they've just put these engines to such extreme force that they just they have to be completely rebuilt, and then the parts are only good for a certain amount of runs, and they have to pass them on to what I call the second string of guys that's happy to get the stuff because they're not going to run them near as hard, but then they're not going to win any races either.
Right. I mean,
see, here's something that you got to understand, and this is the answer to the whole thing, and it's a paradox, and that's why it don't happen. The cars, the Top Fuel is not an unlimited class by any stretch of the imagination. It's got just as many rules as any of the classes. The rules have to be changed a little bit to cause the engine not to make 11,500 horsepower. It has to be cut back to under 8,000 anyway. Maybe even 6 would be better. Something that would allow the cars to go somewhere pretty close to 300 miles an hour in a quarter of a mile. But here's what would happen if they did that. there would be very few explosions. An explosion would only come when there was a terrible mistake made. And that would not be good for TV. The damn TV likes the violence and the fire, and they don't want to see anybody get hurt, you understand, but it is so wonderful when the car is blown completely to bits, just like the Anton Brown accident. I mean, he gets out of it and walks away. What a spectacular thing for TV, and the driver actually gets out of the car and walks away. You know, it's unbelievable. But what that does, that puts drag racing out of the reach of the average person. And if you cut these engines back where they only made 6, 7, maybe even 8,000 horsepower versus what they make today, there'd be very few explosions because the damn parts are so good that you could actually run these cars a whole event on the same parts if they were cut back. You know, blower boost, nitromethane percentage, and nitromethane volume. Those are the three things that you got to control: percentage, volume, pressure. And the problem would be solved. But the TV would be unhappy, and here's something else would happen. The little guys would all of a sudden have just as much a chance as the big guys, because when they're making that kind of horsepower, they're not tearing up parts, and just anybody that come out there could race and win. And it would now be down to the drivers and a little bit of luck, you know, how the car started and all. So the big teams wouldn't like that. I mean, they wouldn't want all that money to be meaningless. They want that money to have something to do with the outcome of the race.
What do you think is stopping because it feels to me like it's time maybe to start talking about wholesale changes, right? And to make dramatic changes to what's going on.
You're not going to get that. You never get a change like that. Every change, you can look at all kind of society. It's the same with our country. What it needs to happen, I mean, the biggest radical change we got was this Trump election. That's unbelievable that we got that even. But that was a radical change, and you don't get that very often. And even he's in Washington facing all sorts of problems to try to do what he wants to do. And the same thing holds true for NHRA or NASCAR. They don't like radical changes. They like just gradual changes because they're afraid with a radical change, the whole system will change, and then they won't be making the money, or they won't be in control. Somebody else will be in control, and societies like that. They don't like big changes.
I agree. I fear that the NHRA, to maintain the trajectory it's on, or to even to maintain wherever we're at, to just keep moving forward. I mean, how long before we've got 8-car fields, especially in these fuel classes? Even pro stock is struggling mightily, and it seems like almost all indicators point back to the tremendous expense associated with doing this. And I don't know, it feels like it's somewhat out of control. We don't want to limit the spending, but we don't want to put systems in place that are going to help these guys grow their sponsorship relations or become bigger stars. It seems like there's a roadblock for these drivers and these teams at every turn. It costs a lot to sell merchandise. It is very difficult to execute a sponsorship deal.
Oh, yeah.
It's hard to do it, yet there's nothing slowing down the amount of money being spent, or it seems very limited, the amount of effort that's going into slowing the money down. And we've got listen, I'm a very positive guy, and I definitely, love the sport of drag racing. I want nothing but the best, but I think sometimes these tough conversations are important, that we got to talk about this stuff instead of just hoping it gets better somehow, some way.
Yeah, it's hard to get it to do anything. I mean, we're faced, the entire system, our whole society has the same problem. Our government's out of control in the money it's spending, the state level, the cities, the whole situation. It's all about spending more and more, and the drag racing is no different. We're exactly in the same boat as all of it. And nobody wants to do anything to change it because they're afraid it might disrupt that paradigm. That's what we're in. It's a certain paradigm. And if a major change comes along and that paradigm changes, then the control can go to different people. The whole thing can go different. And the ones in control don't want that to happen. They know it isn't the best way, but it's working. So we'll just let it go. At least it'll work this way as long as I'm around.
Right.
You know, they think that way in Congress, and they think that way in Glendora. It's going to be good enough to last through my tenure, and then I'll be retired and let the new guys worry about it. And that's just exactly what they
I think you're exactly right. I think you're exactly
Congress
right.
and the Senate, the same deal.
I think you're exactly right. Well, let me switch gears for us here, because I think some of my favorite things to talk to you about have been just the wild and crazy life that kind of comes from being out on the road. I mean, and this can kind of take us a lot of different ways, but I'd like to go back to, I mean, when you were in the midst of, like, say, 1964, and you've got a full summer of races booked, what did life look like back then? I mean, you just hop in a dually pickup and head out hoping for the best?
No, we carried a spare engine. We very seldom ever used it. I mean, I had a 392 in that car all summer long. And then I even went to England with it. And when I got over in England with it, I checked the bearings. I had a cracked main cap. And I went to this little shop out in the middle of nowhere they were still driving the machines with those overhead belts with wooden pulleys. You've seen them, right?
Yeah.
And those guys made a main cap for me for that block. And I finished up the tour and come on home with it and used it till I did away with the car.
Wow. I mean, whenever you went out on the road, how much, I mean, what kind of stuff did you bring with you? I mean, what kind of trailer did you have? What kind of truck did you have? I mean, tell us about, going out and servicing the car on the road. Did you always do that, try to do that at the track, or what did your maintenance program look like between events?
The maintenance program between events was pull off the pan and check the bearings, change the oil. That was it. The heads didn't come off. Here's a funny story. Tom Lemons went to work for me in 1969. His first race was at Winter Nationals, and I'm on the 426 at Pomona. That was his first event. 3 months into the program, we got all the way back in match races to the central part of the United States, and he went home to Bixby, which is a suburb of Tulsa, and he had the car there. And the guys, Bob Kreitz and Steve Carbone and all those guys that wanted to know what I was doing with that 426 to make it run so good, took Tommy out and got him drinking to figure out what the compression ratio was on my motor. And so they said to Tommy, what's the compression ratio on that 426? And Tommy says, I don't know. They said, well, where are the pistons at? And, how far do they stick out of the block? He says, I don't know. And Kreitz says, are you that stupid? He says, just give us approximate. When the heads are off, how much does the piston stick up out of the block? And Tommy said, I don't know. He says, the fucking heads ain't been off since Pomona.
Oh, that's classic.
And that's the way that's how I made money. And that's why I hated to race Shirley so bad in the later years. She ran the car so damn hard. She wanted to win every run, and you just had to run with her. And so that meant you had to maintenance the car more, where I could run Tommy Ivo and it didn't matter. It wasn't a do or die between us. I mean, he won a few races. I won a few races, but we made money because we didn't run a lot of percentage and we didn't run a lot of sparkly.
Did
You know, we
how
just ran the car
serious?
easy.
Like talking about racing Shirley, Muldowney, and racing time. How much did winning and losing mean to you personally, and mean to your ability to sell future dates?
Well, it was really important to me. I mean, I never laid down on a race, but you know, I mean, sometimes I didn't run as hard as I could have run because I'm saving my parts. So they used to think that me and Ivo, we just he'd win one and I'd win one. That wasn't true.
It wasn't like arranged.
No, it wasn't like wrestling. We really were racing. But he didn't want to break a lot of parts either because he was a long ways from home, and we didn't have full machine shops and all with us in those days. You know, this is back in the day when it was. I didn't get the big fifth wheel trailer until 1975. Before then, it was just pull-alongs, you know, little tag-alongs,
Yeah.
pickup trucks, campers.
Let's talk about. Well, I want to tell me. Let's talk a little bit about life out on the road. I mean, whenever you were booking those match races and throughout, you know, how often would you guys run in a week?
Oh, a lot of times we loved it when we could run like Wednesday night at Maple Grove and Saturday night at Englishtown and maybe Sunday night at Vargo, Sunday afternoon at Vargo. If we could get 3 match races in a week, boy, that was really good.
Well, and that's good money, right? I mean, hell,
Yeah.
if you're not having
Oh,
to, if you're
yeah.
not hurting the
And
car.
if you're only, it didn't burn much nitro. The very little nitro was wasted. Like today, they waste thousands of gallons just warming them up, you know. And we didn't have much warm up. It was no like the first match race, the car warmed up. You know, it was pushed down the track, and while it was coming down the track and making the loop around, it was getting all the heat it wanted. There was no warm up in the pits and wasting that $3 and $4 a gallon nitro methane. It was actually $1.40 a gallon in the beginning.
No joke, $1.40 a gallon.
Yeah, in the beginning, it came in the prettiest little cans, and I don't have one of them. It was nitro in the blue and yellow can, stenciled. It was really pretty. I'd really love to have one of those around here somewhere, but I've not seen one at a swap meet or anything.
How did you go about getting nitro back then? Was it just readily available somewhere? You knew someone who
Yeah,
had it?
in the beginning, it was. You just got it wherever you wanted. You know, 2 or 3 of the speed shops, they had it, and it was in either a 5-gallon, it was peak nitro fuel, that's what it was called, or in a gallon can. And like the swap rep one would burn 1 gallon for a run. That's what it took to make a run. And most of that was burned in the warming up, you know, coming up to the line. Just like today, most of the fuel is burned up coming up to the line and doing the burnout, not doing the actual run. It don't burn very much during the run. Well, there ain't enough time.
Right, right.
You can do the math at 3.5 seconds, even 100 gallons a minute. You can see that it can't burn very much fuel.
No. When did you guys start doing? We were doing our photo issue this month, and we kind of had the whole thing focused on burnouts. And I was doing some research about burnouts and kind of how this. And there seems to be a lot of varying opinions on who kind of got the burnout thing going. When did you start doing a burnout or adding a burnout to your racing operations?
Well, you heard it here from the horse's mouth. I can tell you for sure where the first burnouts were done. But prior to this event, we just pulled to the starting line and we went. But this was at Riverside, California, 1969, the Hot Rod Magazine Championships. And the cars push-started way in the back, and it was a long drive down to the starting line. And one of the cars, I'm thinking it might have been either Kreitz or Carbone. The actual car, I wouldn't swear to. Somebody out in California might know. Hit a burnout. They actually smoked the tires for a pretty good little distance because there was a lot of room, and then they drove on down to the starting line and it made a difference. The car ran quicker. And so, boy, it didn't take long. We all started doing it. So,
Right.
Riverside, California, Hot Rod Magazine Championships, 1969, early in the year. That was where the very first burnouts were done with fuel dragsters.
Wow.
They did it ever since from that day forward.
And
yeah, those burnouts weren't done on the starting line. They were done behind the starting line.
Wow. And how did that whole process develop? Where, I mean, when you picked it up, I mean, do you remember what it felt like when you did a burnout for the first time, or tell us about the first time you did a burnout?
Well, so the next time I made a run, I did it, and I actually stopped and then burned the tires because it's we spun the tires in those days.
Right.
So that gave me a nice gummy tire when I went down to the starting line with some heat in it. And of course, it made a difference. It picked up the ETs at least a tenth of a second.
Wow. And I mean, and no surprise, right? I mean, the tires are hot and sticky, and I mean,
so then there wasn't room to do that. That was the only track that I know of that was at that long distance back behind the starting line. So then we had to just burn out across the starting line, and the guys all ran out and pushed you back. And of course, what we did at first, some of the guys didn't want to do it, and so you had to tell your guy you're racing, look, I'm going to do a burnout, so you fire behind me a little bit if you don't want to do one, because I'm going to take a little extra time. And they didn't care.
How did it affect? Did you notice it instantaneously? It affect the clutch at all?
Well, that was what brought on the water, and actually it was bleach to start with.
Right.
For some reason, they wanted bleach. The clutches were getting set so loose that you couldn't spin the tires anymore on the pavement. This is before sprayed tracks.
Right.
And so a couple of guys smoked their clutches out trying to get them to spin the tires, and they couldn't get them to spin the tires. So they put down bleach, and then the VHT and RFI immediately got on the program making compound. They knew that the tires needed to be softened up a little bit, so they made this material. It was like the little tire patching tube material that when you buy a patch kit.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Yeah.
Only they had more solvent in it to make it thinner. That's what RFI was. You could actually use that stuff to put a patch on a tube, and that's where the fire burnouts. And the first fire burnout came as an accident. Was at Long Beach, and they put down the material on one side. It was nighttime, and I rolled forward into the material, and they hadn't got the material on the other tire, so they pushed me back, and as the car went back, the flames were already coming out of the headers, and they were pointed pretty much at the tires, and the tire rolled up, and the flame caught that material on fire that was on the one side of the car, and I have a picture of it because only one side is on fire, and then I quickly spun in it to get out of the fire, and it made a beautiful scene, and that was the beginning of the fire burnout.
And so tell us about doing fire burnouts, because and after that, albeit an accident, did you quickly realize, like, hey, this is something we need to be doing, we need to be adding to our show?
Oh, yeah. Me and Tommy picked up right on that right away. And so we had a system. He would put down the material and then string it out just a little bit in front of the tire. And I would spin the tire slowly at first, and that would get it all around the tire, and I always waited till there was a little bit of flame popping out of the pipes. And, of course, this is slingshot days, you know. And then I just give her a little light spin, and boy, it'd sling it all up on the headers, and it just all burst into flames because the flames were coming out of the headers. And I lit my own. And Jack Hart at the NHRA, they knew we were lighting those fires. There's no way it could just be happening, because we could make it do it any time we wanted. And they had cameras on me and everything. And Tommy's way away from the car, and it just started. They did everything. They went over the car looking for igniters, everything, because if they could have, because I was told not to light those fires. but if it lit by itself, it was not my control, right?
Right.
So then they finally said no tracking compound. You just have to use water, and that's how they fixed it.
Well, it's that was, I mean, how much? I mean, did you notice the effect that whenever you kind of added some pageantry to what you were trying to do? I mean, you were always outspoken and you had the look. Did you know that you were putting on a show? I mean, did you consciously know that, hey, I'm out here being competitive. We're a racer and this is serious competition. But did you recognize that you had kind of a
That's
responsibility
right.
as a
I would
showman?
for years we'd get all dressed up in our uniforms, and I'd say to Tommy or the guys in the motel room, "Showtime!"
I love it.
And that was the favorite word. Showtime! Time to go out there, and do it because it's. I mean, it was a show.
Right. It is a show. I mean, I agree completely.
Yeah,
Showtime.
I used to. Fire burnout was so popular, NHRA completely outlawed it, right? And then, I would go to these strips and they would want it to happen, and they would have to have a letter from NHRA stating it was all right for me to do a fire burnout at this match race at this NHRA drag strip. They'd have to have that in hand so that I would not get into trouble with NHRA for doing it.
That's amazing to me. I mean, how many times did you and the NHRA bump heads on stuff like that? You're out here trying to do match races, and I mean, how many times did you guys bump heads on that type of thing?
Oh, it went on and on and on. It never stopped. I mean, it was it was so funny because then when the new management took over, when Tom Compton took over the deal, and Wally was really just kind of pushed to the back. The big thing, Wally's biggest. Do you remember the book that they printed a number of years ago? The big, nice hardback book.
Yep.
And
I got
it just had that one picture of my car in it.
Yeah.
Do you know that there was 18 pages of Don Garlits in that book when they first made it? And they kept going upstairs to Wally, and he kept taking a little bit out and a little bit out. And finally, they wanted to print the book. And they said, "Wally, this is the last time you're going to get to look at it. Take out whatever you don't want." And he just took everything out of mine but that one picture, and it doesn't even have a caption. And
Really?
yeah, that's exactly what. Because somewhere in my records I have the 18 pages that they were going to put in there, but it's in it's gobbledygook printing. It's just the pictures, and you can't read the printing. It's just a computer mess. They sent it to me from the print company. What they had actually removed.
Did you and Wally have that contentious of a relationship?
Yeah, after the PRO, there was no saving it after that, because I actually had an event against his U.S. Nationals, which was his baby, and they could have shot a cannon through the stands at the 72 Nationals, and he never forgave me for that. And we would have kept going, but the sponsors said, "Look, we don't want NHRA destroyed. We just wanted the big purses. So please get off of that date." And we did. And of course,
Did you have like
mistake.
did you have that? Yeah. I mean, do you feel that was a mistake?
I have mixed emotions on that. I didn't really want to have an association. I didn't want that. I wanted, and the racers, they didn't do well. I mean, they even got one now, and they don't do anything with it. They're racing. They're not really association people.
Right.
I didn't want to destroy the NHRA for sure.
Right. I mean, and I'm sure that was tough because I can only imagine the sense of ownership you felt. You know what I mean? To have those races and to try to push the sport forward. I'm sure it was bittersweet, but I totally understand that you don't want to see the NHRA, fail or fall apart.
I was so happy when Tom Compton got in there, and he called me on the phone. He'd call me at my home on my personal phone, and he was. I really liked the guy. I thought he did a good job, but I guess there were some issues, and but we had a good relationship. He asked me to be the czar of the fuel racing at one time, and just take it over completely and control it, and see what I could do with it about bringing it, under control. And I told him it would just make too many enemies. I just couldn't do that, because I knew exactly what to do. And there isn't a team out there would like to hear what I had to say, because it would mess their combination up.
But man, Don, I wonder what could have been. What year do you think that would have been?
It was right after Tom Compton took over. And after Scott got killed, right after Scott Coletta got killed, he asked me to take it over.
Do you wish that you would have ever, or do you still stand by the fact that it burnt too many bridges?
I stand by my decision. Yeah. I wouldn't have near the friends in the sport today, because I would have been ironclad. I mean, there wouldn't be any of those big blowers out there. There wouldn't be any of those big pumps out there, and there wouldn't be any 330 mile an hour speeds. They'd all be running about 290, 295, and that'd be it. We'd be running quarter mile, and there'd probably be a whole different bunch of guys would be the big names too. It wouldn't be all just one group.
Right. Do you think that? How out of control is this deal right now that they would seem every time they stand on the gas they're running 330 plus miles per hour? It feels like this whole move to 1,000 feet was made in the name of reduced trap speeds, but here we are right back up against it. Where do you stand on as far as the safety aspect of the cars going that fast yet again?
I said it once and I'll say it again. There's no place in auto racing for two cars to be on a track side by side with an 8,000 horsepower engine going 300 miles an hour. I'm all for speed. I love speed. And I said a long time ago, what we should do is take a place like Gainesville that's got the 5,000 feet of shutoff, take all the timing equipment out of the middle of the track, and just run once a year, have an all-out, how fast can we go? No rules. Except,
I love it.
Internal combustion engine.
Right.
And let them just do whatever they want. And, of course, there's no spectators on the side of the track. Whatever was watching would have to be back behind where the cars are, because they're gonna throw shit everywhere, right?
Right.
And send them. I bet we'd run way over 350 miles an hour with the present technology in the quarter mile.
Oh, yeah, yeah. I mean, it would be hard to believe. And I really think that there is an element of that exists right now, because I think part of what I'm seeing is racers, I feel like there's a move towards land speed racing. I feel like the side-by-side competition isn't nearly as important as maybe it once was. It feels like everybody just wants to blow the scoreboards down, that it's just world record or bust.
It's true, because the driver, he wants to be sitting in the fastest son of a bitch that ever was, and the crew chief wants that number on the board, because that's his intelligence.
Right.
He did that, and we need a place where that can be displayed, and there's absolutely no rules that says, oh, you can't use but 92% nitro, or your engine can only be 500 cubic inches or whatever. Let them do whatever they want once a year with nobody in the stands. And of course, the driver signs off. He knows he's in a death ship if anything goes wrong. And but they would still be plenty of guys to drive them.
I think so.
Afraid.
I think so. I mean, I see it all across drag racing as a whole, from the nitro ranks all the way down to these street tire cars and everything. It feels like, guys, there's something that I've been seeing as a trend the last few years at a lot of these outlaw door slammer races, where it's really not about winning the race. It's about setting the record, or being the fastest guy, or being the next barrier, and that
Right.
concerns me because I feel the
Exactly.
competition
Exactly. And see, we
should be
don't
where we're
really
focused.
know right now. We don't really know how fast and how quick you can go on planet Earth with a dragster. Because if you got rules, then that throws it all out the window.
Yeah,
So we need to do that, and then have real strict rules for the cars that race side by side, and there's spectators all the way down that their lives are in danger to a certain extent, from the pieces that can come up and hit them. And we want that to all be safe and competitive. And that needs to be something that not necessarily who's got the most money, but who's got the most smarts to get the most out of the car without it destructing. And then we'd have this rule. Another rule would be a good one. Would be no engines come apart after the race starts.
I like that idea, Don, and that's something you
I've
told
said
me
that
like
for
10
years.
years ago. Yeah, one of the first interviews I ever did with you, you talked about that, and I always thought that, you know what? He's exactly right. Why you got to race the engine you start, you qualified with, or some of these things that would. I mean, I can't help but feel.
We ran 120 cars at Bakersfield in 1965. All 120 cars made 2 and 3 runs on Friday qualifying, and that got 64 of the quickest, which ran on Saturday. It started in the afternoon, and late that afternoon, 64 cars had run. That's 6
Right.
rounds. And then that winner got to sit out on Sunday while a 32 car field ran. That's 5 rounds. And then that winner had to run me for the overall championship. So it was 6 rounds both days. You couldn't do that today with these cars if your lives depended on it.
Not a
And plus, there
chance.
ain't 64 cars.
Right, not a chance. Not a chance.
And we need to get back. We don't maybe necessarily need to get back to that, but we need to think about that as where the drag racing was in its heyday. I mean, these cars came from all over the United States, and the stands were full.
Do you think kids, well, two things I want to talk about, a couple of things here. First and foremost, you mentioned something about figuring out, and I'm switching gears big time here, but you and I both are having a moment of, I think, vindication. I got a news article, and you talked about finding out what the fastest dragster on the planet Earth is, and it kind of made me think about some of the things that are going on other planets, and the moon, and everything else. And there was a news story that came across the New York Times here. I believe it was yesterday, and one of my guys sent it to me this morning. We were all talking about it, and you and I have both talked about the cosmos a lot, all the things going on out there. When, did you feel a sense of validation when you see a story about glowing auras and black money, the Pentagon's mysterious UFO program, a headline in the New York Times? I never thought I'd see the day that the New York Times read a headline like that.
Well, the New York Times philosophy is all the news that's fit to be heard. That was their philosophy, and so I guess that they figure that's fit to be read now. Yeah, well, I mean, I've known all this stuff for years. I mean, we didn't mention this in the beginning. I have a couple of other interests, other than drag racing. I'm an economist to start with, because I'm a bookkeeper and accountant by trade, and I know how to handle money. It's pretty obvious. Um, and I've studied world economy. I know how paper money works. I understand the gold system. I understand all that. But also, I'm big into archaeology. And when you get into archaeology, you want to know where it all came from and how it all got started and how all this stuff goes. And there's so much evidence in the rocks and the stuff on this planet that if you study the least little bit, you have to realize that they're not telling us the truth. The history. There's a book out, and it's so funny. It says everything you know is wrong.
Yeah, I've seen it. Yep, yep. I mean, and we talked about this before, but we're talking about 14 billion years, right?
Yeah.
It's
Well,
hard to,
actually longer
or
than that.
longer, yeah.
But that's for our universe.
So if our universe has existed for 14 billion years, I mean, are you convinced that we're not the only species that have ever existed? The
Oh yeah.
only
Well, I mean, I don't.
intelligent species?
They came here from the Orlando Sentinel. They sent a reporter up here, and he sat right here in this office where I'm talking to you now, and he says, "What is this thing about aliens?" I says, "I'll tell you about aliens." I says, "I don't believe in them. I know about them. There's a difference." And they gave me a double truck in color. I have it framed. It's so neat. 2 full pages in the newspaper and pictures about me that when you open up the paper, it's just one great big sheet, you know. I call that
A double,
what you
yeah.
call a double truck.
Yeah, that's you're speaking my language, the publishing lingo. Yeah, I
And
mean,
that's what they gave me, and I have it. In the first, like within 1 or 2 paragraphs, it has that line. I don't believe in aliens. I know about them.
well, how do
And
you come
I
to
do
know about
them.
aliens, Don? How do you come to know about aliens?
Well, I've seen them. I've seen the ships several times. I've seen the stuff that they you know, the all the different stuff about them. I have friends that have seen them. Craig Breedlove saw a flying saucer right there on the coast. He was down on the beach, and him and his buddy looked out there, and here come one flying along, and he says, "What is that?" And Craig says, "That's a flying saucer."
Really? Well, I mean, this video that I believe the Defense Department released of a Navy F-18 encountering an unknown object. I mean, to have something like that in the New York Times this week. I mean, like I said, is there a feeling of vindication for you? Because, I mean, when was your first encounter? When did you first see a UFO or something that you felt was funny? I mean, weren't you out on the highway with your wife?
Well, that's much later. The first one that I saw that I know now was a UFO was in World War II, about 1943, probably, maybe 44. I think 43. Our dairy was right between a couple of the big airfields where they trained, and the fighters would do the dog fighting over this particular area because it was all farmland and no houses. And that way, if a plane something happened, they would crash and wouldn't crash into the community. And so my brother would lay out there in the field and watch them. It was so much fun. You know, the P-38s and the P-40s and the P-51s, all dogfighting. I love the P-38s, the twin engine ones, you know.
Yeah, I can't.
They were the P-38 Lightning, they were called. And so we're watching them all dogfight, and all of a sudden, this great big black thing appears where they're at. I mean, I didn't even see it fly there. It just all of a sudden it materialized. But you know, I could have been looking somewhere else for a minute. But anyway, it was there, and it was much bigger than these planes, and it just kind of moved around a little bit, like it didn't have wings or nothing. It was like a great big piece of pipe, and black. And boy, those planes got out of there. They all headed back to base. The party was over. And then this thing just kind of moved a little bit and just shot out into space and disappeared. And we thought, it's so funny, because right about that time, one of the comic books had a little story about, and a comic strip about, the government had built this new fueling station. Was a great big, had all little motors all around it, and it would fly up into the sky, and the planes could come in one end, refuel, and fly out the other end. And this in the comic book. And so we actually thought that's what it was. But why the planes didn't go in and out of it, we didn't know.
Right. Oh, yeah, yeah.
But this was a flying saucer, unidentified. It wasn't a saucer. It was an unidentified flying object. that just flew up into that crowd of those airplanes for some reason. Whoever knows, you know. But that was my first one that I actually saw that now I know was something not of this earth, because we don't have anything that would operate like that.
Right, still today, right?
No, not even today we don't have anything that operates like that.
Well,
and then I was on my way to St. Louis on a TWA, and as we crossed over the state of Georgia from Tampa, one of the things flew almost right up beside the ship. It was less than 1,000 feet away from us, and I had a really good look at it. And the captain immediately turned on the seatbelt lights, signs, and I was just peering out the window, and the stewardess came and pulled me down into the seat and made me put my seatbelt on. And by the time I got back to the window and looked, the thing that had went out there, no telling how far, it was real tiny. It went away so quick. And I know that wasn't an experimental thing that we had, because that would be totally illegal to fly an experimental plane that close
to a passenger, a commercial airliner.
Yeah. They would not do that under any circumstances. That was a UFO, is what it was. And
is that what sparked your interest in this? I mean, or did you just go, you know what, I got to figure out what these things are that I've seen? Because you were out on the blacktop or out on a highway somewhere and saw one as well, right?
Yeah, my wife and I were returning from a Super Chevy, and they were getting ready to launch over to Cape, and I looked out of the truck. I'm going south on 75. And I look out toward the east, and I see this big white orb, and it's got a kind of a vapor trail behind it. And it's like, I'm looking out of the truck. It's like about 10 o'clock, you know, on a clock, and it's traveling along. It's going a little faster than the truck, but not much faster. And I say to my wife, I said, "What is that?" And she looked at it, she said, "I guess that's one of those UFOs you're always talking about." And then it speeded up and turned and went into space, and within just moments was completely gone. Now, we don't have anything like that even today. So that was another encounter. And then in 1969, Tommy and I were traveling westbound on that interstate that goes through Dayton. I think it's at 80, I think. And we saw one. And it was just flying along the treetops. And of course, we were right by that Wright-Patterson Air Base, which is the big Air Force deal. That's where they kept all the flying saucer stuff, you know, in supposedly hangar 18. And we saw one, but it was just right out in the daylight, you know, flying around. And we thought, well, maybe we've got our own now, you know. And so we scoured the papers the next day to see if there was anything about this new aircraft that was flying around Dayton, but there wasn't nothing in there. It was a flying saucer.
What has it been like over the years? I mean, you've seen these things and you're passionate about it and extremely well versed. I mean, you and I have had all sorts of conversations about space travel. I mean, yesterday we were talking about the moon landings. I mean, do you take shit from people for these thoughts and opinions, or what? I mean, what do some people come up and tell you that they're and cheer you on, or what?
Over the years, I figured out who not to talk about it around, and just keep a low key, because
Right.
There's a lot of people don't want to hear it, and they don't believe it, and they think it's all hogwash, and they think you're nuts, you know. So it's best to just keep it to yourself. But there are a few people who've seen them too, and they really really enjoy meeting someone that knows about it, that can kind of put a little light on it. Let me give you this is the best of the whole thing. I was very good friends with the congressman from my district here, which was District 6, was Congressman Cliff Stearns. He was a congressman for 22 years. And I got a call from him. He said a package is going to be delivered to you today, FedEx. He said they're having a disclosure program at the Washington Press Club in Washington tomorrow. He said this package will arrive. It's got all the credentials for you to go there. Get your video team together and get up there and video this event. I would like to know what's going on, but I don't dare go over there because it would ruin my career. And what this group had done, this was Dr. Stephen Greer's disclosure project, and he sent every member of Congress an invitation and a package to come over here and at the press club and hear these people confess what they knew. These were retirees from the civil service, the Army, the Navy, everything. They were all there. So I quickly got my team together and we drove straight through to Washington, D.C., and we attended the press club meeting. Every major network was in that room, including the BBC from England, and all their big cameras in the back of the room filming. There was 23 guys, I think, that was confessing. And they each got up and told their story in front of the group, and the cameras were rolling, including my little chicken shit camera that we had for some of my TV shows. And we taped it. Not one word was ever shown on national television or anything. And a month later, the Miami Herald ran a little story making, this stupid, crazy group had this disclosure thing in Washington, the most ridiculous thing you ever heard of. And these people got up there and told everything that they knew up to now and said they were ready to go before Congress, put their hand on the Bible and confess everything they knew. We've been dealing with these aliens for years and years. They've been coming here for a long, long time. And it's just a fact, and they can make all the fun out of it they want, but it's a fact. That I got what was so neat about this thing. Some of these people have written books. Some of these people that were on the stage, and I got to meet them and talk to them, and then retired Navy people, and it was really exciting to me to actually one-on-one with some of these nice gentlemen that have been through all this stuff.
And I'm sure they were able to kind of like clear some things up for you, right? I mean, I'm sure they were probably surprised what you already knew.
Yeah. They've got so much stuff on it that one guy when they first started seeing them, this was right after World War II, when there was a lot of them. See, that atomic bomb really got their attention. We blew those bombs up. They didn't like that. They got down here real quick and started looking into things. Doesn't it strike you as rather strange that we've not had a nuclear confrontation in all these years with all the supposedly armament that we've got, all the China, the Russia, the India, the United States, the England, the France, everybody's armed to the teeth, but nobody blows a bomb up. Are we that smart? Do you actually believe that?
I mean, I have to. No, I don't think we're that smart. I mean, you look at the poor decisions that are made daily by human beings, and it is suspect that we've been able to maintain. I mean, despite some wars and conflicts,
they keep an orbiting spaceship, a big one, halfway between the moon and the Earth. And they have a lot of stuff there just in case something goes wrong. And this one guy that was the sergeant that was in charge of NATO of all the alien crashes. See, there's been a lot of crashes for different reasons, and we are the repository for the alien spaceship for the free world. And then Russia is the repository other world, the other side, you might say. And this guy was he knew a lot. He was there at the meeting, and he said that on 2 occasions there was an accident, and one time it was the United States had a missile on the way to Russia, and another time Russia had a missile on its way to the United States, an actually armed nuclear warhead. And the phones were ringing because there was not an act of war, it was an accident. And the aliens in both cases neutralized the weapon and didn't let it happen. And then this other guy, this was the air base in California. What the heck is the name of it? The one where they send all the missiles they test over the Pacific. I'll think of it in a second. Anyway, this is when they were first had the intercontinental ballistic missile. They were testing them at this base, and so they sent this one. It had a dummy warhead on it, and they sent it toward Moscow. And when it got up to the top and started over, I think the apogee, is that what they call it?
Yes.
When they blew it up.
Really?
Because it really didn't want to go to Moscow. They were just testing. So the next morning, the Photoshop calls the base commander. Vandenberg, that's the base.
Vandenberg.
They called the base commander, said, "Commander, you got to get down here to the Photoshop. We got something you need to look at." So he goes down there, and they had these cameras running at 64 frames a second. This is 16 millimeter film, telescopic cameras. The same type of device that they had when the Challenger blew up, and you actually got to look at the O-ring blow out of the solid fuel rocket. Do you remember those pictures?
Yeah, I saw them. I was just looking at them like 3 days ago.
So they ran it through at regular speed, and everything looked fine. And then the base commander says, "I didn't see anything funny." What he says, "Wait till you see it a frame at a time." So they ran it up to the top, a frame at a time, and all of a sudden, one frame now out of 64 frames per second, a flying saucer appears beside the missile. In the next frame, a beam comes out of the saucer into the missile. In the next frame, the saucer's on the other side of the missile. In the next frame, a beam goes into the missile. In the next frame, the saucer's gone. 4 frames of intercontinental ballistic missile flying at 5,000 miles an hour?
I would say, yeah.
4 frames, a saucer has maneuvered on both sides of it and tested it and determined that it's an inert missile. There's nothing to be harmed. Let the humans play, and it goes away. And so the commander got on the phone to the Pentagon and told them what they had. And the Pentagon told the commander, "Put that film in a canister, put it in a briefcase and lock it. We got a courier will be there to pick it up." This never happened. And so but the Photoshop didn't know what they told the commander. So the commander goes into the Photoshop and says, "Make me a copy of that and give me the original and the copy." And so they did, and he kept the copy and sent the original to the Pentagon. And the base commander then, when he was 80-some years old, went on the Learning Channel and told the story and showed the film. And I actually saw it on the Learning Channel.
What do you think?
They don't do that anymore either.
That's true. I mean, and it does feel like we were talking about this the other day, that it's you and I going back and forth. One of the things, and I'm not a big time conspiracy theorist or anything like that. I liken myself a learner. I like to read, and I liken myself. I pay attention, right? I feel like I pay attention, and to me, it feels there. We were just talking about the moon landings, and I've had a hard time wrapping my head around the fact, just being a logical thinker, that in 1972 or 69 through 72, we're going back and forth to the moon 250,000 miles away from here. Yet since 1972, there have been no public or known trips to the moon. There's been no human, as far as the public is concerned, further than 400 miles away from the surface of the planet. And I guess that'd be like, you going 300 miles an hour in 1972, and nobody goes over 200 ever since.
Yeah. Yeah, it's hard to wrap your mind around that. That's exactly right. And probably the truth of the matter is we probably didn't make the trip in the 60s because of all sorts of problems with radiation. And I have a hard time in my mind understanding how they could have that vehicle go from the surface of the moon up and meet the orbiting piece to get back to Earth without all the equipment that it takes to do what we do. I mean, we have so much ground equipment and everything organizing all of that kind of operation.
Right.
And for those guys that just left the surface of the moon on this moon vehicle and then go on up there and meet the orbiting piece and then come on back, it is a little far-fetched.
Well, I mean, and not to mention, like, surviving the radiation belt and all these other things that, like, we're not sure is possible, right? And,
yeah.
And then I often wonder, like, oh, wow, maybe we just don't know that, like, they're going to the moon yesterday. They're there all the time. Maybe you know what I mean? Like, I don't know. It does seem very difficult, and I always try to use it like the racing framework where, it would be, like I said, if you went 300 miles per hour in 1972, we'd be going 400 miles or 500 miles an hour by now. You would think. You would think. I mean, like an iPhone, the phone we're talking on is more powerful than a computer would have been in 1969. In a computer as big as your office.
We're talking on a better computer than they had.
Correct.
Exactly. We probably didn't go. But, today, we don't know what they've done. We don't know how much advances have been made, technically speaking, about the vehicles and the craft and everything and how to survive the radiation belt. I mean, we know that somebody can do it because they're here. They've come here,
Well, it can be done.
And so maybe we've crossed, we've got, the phone that we're holding itself is probably alien technology. I'll tell you one more thing that reinforces what we're talking about. A few summers ago, I went out to Iowa to Eddyville to do a show, and they always like to take me someplace to impress me whenever I'm around these little backwoods places. Even in California, they always take me someplace that's impressive. Well, they took me to this lighting company that does all the lighting for the stadiums in this country.
Musco. I've been there in Oskaloosa, Iowa, right? MUSCO. I've been there.
Okay. The guy that was running that place took me into his office, and he says, I want to show you something. So we went back into this room, and he turned on this machine. He punched a few things into the keyboard, and then in a few minutes, a bicycle chain came out of the machine, and I have it right here on my desk. A little plastic bicycle chain, but it's a perfect little chain, and it was printed.
3D
printed. 3D printed, yeah. And he said, I could make you one out of stainless steel, but it would take longer. And I said, my God, where did this kind of technology come from? And just as matter-of-factly as you and I are talking, he said, it's alien technology. Just like that.
No
Which
joke.
takes me back to the guy that was on the Learning Channel again about aliens. And he said when they were inspecting the Roswell crash vehicles, he was one of the team that worked on it. He said the first thing that they noticed, there was no wires anywhere. It was all this stuff that looked like horsehair. fiber optics. And, of course, there were no vacuum tubes or anything. It was all printed circuitry. And he said, but we never have figured out how they built the spaceship. He said it looked like it was grown. There's no seams, no fasteners. And, of course, it was printed. The spaceship was printed because that way they can put any material in it they want, and they can mix it all up. And that's what the guy told me at the lighting place. What would you call it? Osco?
Musco, M-U-S-C-O, Musco Lighting.
Yeah, he said that what was so neat about this printing deal was they could actually feed aluminum into it and then change it to stainless steel, and it would all be bonded perfectly. And you can't weld stainless steel to aluminum or aluminum to iron or whatever. But the printing don't care. It does. It bonds it in the molecule somehow. It's a weird technology.
It really is. I mean, and I go back to, like you said, I mean, if you really think about some of the things that we have and the technology that exists, it does beg, it raises some alarm, you know, in my opinion. It does.
Yes, it raises some very serious questions.
It does. And over the years, Don, have you found that one of the things that I've always enjoyed talking to you, and I got to tell you, from a business perspective, you have been like the Beatles have been to Rolling Stone, or Bob Dylan to Rolling Stone. What Don Garlits does for Drag Illustrated is every time we do a story on you, it sells. It moves the needle. People talk about it. People read it. People tell stories about it. And have you found that over the years, like especially like moving back to drag racing, your willingness to talk about things and talk to people and tell your story and let people know how you think and feel, I mean, how big of a part has that been? Your being an open book, been to the success and stardom that you've enjoyed.
There's a line in Frank Sinatra's song, "I Did It My Way,"
yeah,
that I really like, and it says, "What is a man? If not himself, he is not. To say the things he truly feels, and not the words of one who kneels."
I have goosebumps.
Yeah, that's my philosophy, and it's cost me a lot of money. I could have had really big sponsors if I had just kneeled down to the NHRA, not done the PRO, not spoke out about different things, and just the words of one who kneels. That's the key.
It's especially in light of recent events, and we lost Bob Glidden this week. I mean,
yeah, what a loss!
What a loss! Almost immeasurable. The contribution he made to the sport and the impact that he had on the sport of drag racing. I mean, is it important to you more so now when you think about stuff like that I mean, when you think about the effort you've made to preserve drag racing history with the museum, and does things like that, the passing of Bob Glidden, kind of just reinforce the importance of what you've done over the years, preserving history and telling your story?
Yes, it does. He's in the Hall of Fame, and he belongs to be in there. And I'm just so glad that all happened. And you go out there to the Monument Park and you see all the names of the different people who gave this sport everything, and got very little out of it, because there's not a lot of people got a lot out of drag racing, if you want to know the truth of the matter. Just a handful. Most of the people that participated over the years just did it for the love of it. And I'm so happy that we're able to recognize them in a small degree. And, I just feel like we've done the right thing here.
I agree. Whenever I go there, go down to Ocala, Florida, and walk in there and walk across those bricks, those custom bricks with names on them, and walk into the front store there and start making my way through your place, it's a humbling experience to know that this is like a product of drag racing. I mean, sometimes when I think about facilities like yours and all the stories that exist in here and all the machinery and all the blood, sweat, and tears that went into to making these things a reality, these machines and these careers and these, the names that this sport has produced. It's almost overwhelming. I mean, you forget how much drag racing means to so many people. I know in the grand scheme of thing, we're a pimple, on the butt of the world, right? I mean, drag racing's just this small thing. But, I mean, you traveled around the world drag racing, and know people far and wide because of drag racing. And it's kind of unbelievable, right?
Exactly right.
I mean, I feel lucky to be a part of it most days.
And lucky to be alive.
Yes, that's exactly right. Especially you. You maybe more so than me.
Close calls. No question about it. I always like to quote my friend Chuck Yeager. I knew him. Is he still with us, or have you heard?
I don't know. Let me Google it while we're on the phone.
Anyway, Chuck Yeager told me, he said, I'm so happy that I survived all my crashes and I was able to bring back information that made it better for the rest of them.
Yeah, he's still alive, I believe.
Yeah, I hadn't heard about him being dead, so I'm hoping he is. He's got to be getting up there.
94.
94. God bless him.
That's amazing.
Yeah. Yeah, he's one of my good guys. I have a few heroes. That's one of them.
When you look back, and I'm not going to keep you too much longer, Don, I promise.
It's okay. I'm enjoying it.
Is there a specific, I mean, just talking about Mr. Yeager and the bringing things back and the lessons that the experiences he had that impacted, aviation, or is there what are some of your, I mean, oh my goodness, there's so many things that you're attached to. We probably can't identify them all. Are there any near misses? Are there any things that you thought was any developments in drag racing as far as technology is concerned or how things are done that you thought was going to be the next big thing that just didn't turn out?
That I thought was going to be the next big thing?
Yeah, in drag racing.
Well, I can tell you what I thought was not going to be the next big thing. the rear engine car. I actually when I actually got where I could get it down the quarter mile, and it was running pretty good. I never thought it would be the championship car. I thought it would just be something that I could run, that nobody would really like it, but I could be able to run a few more years in safety and be somewhat competitive. How's that?
Really?
And we had the new slingshot built. It's never made a run. It's hanging in the showroom in Summit in McDonough, Georgia, and that was really what we were going to. I figured I'd probably get back into that.
So you weren't committed to the design.
My wife calmed down a little bit.
You weren't committed to the design at all, then.
No, after making run after run, and it kept getting off the drag strip, you couldn't do it today with those damn concrete barriers on the side of the strip.
It's hard to believe. Obviously the move made in the name of safety. I've got that famous picture somewhere here. Where's that at? There it is. At Lions. Did you think that was it?
There's a picture, the famous picture at the winning run in Pomona with the slingshot with the flame or the fire, and then the parts going right by the guy's head. And I'm winning the race.
It's a wonder anybody survived that.
Oh, I know it. I never forget the words of my wife. She come out there in the shop, and the slingshot was, we put the rear engine car aside because 3 months that went by, I hadn't been able to get down the drag strip. And she come out in the shop, and I was putting the finishing touches on the body, the shorty body on the slingshot, Swamp Rat 15. And she said, "What is that?" And she knew exactly what it was, so she was a comptroller. It had been nobody had sent a check, for a deposit or anything. And I said, "That's my new car for 1971. I said, I got 3 weeks out to be in California. And she said, "You'd get back in one of those things after it's mutilated you like that?" I said, honey, this is what I do. I said, but it doesn't have a transmission. I said, we've taken that out. She said, all your friends that were killed in the last 2 years in these cars, not one of them had a transmission. It was all different stuff that got them.
She was a wise woman, Don. She even knew better.
She said, get back on this project. So we did.
And thank God she did. Thank God she did.
Yeah.
Because it really is. I mean, I'm looking at this photo here again, and I just, I mean, what an absolute blessing that we're having this conversation. Did you think that was it, or did you, or I mean, when that was happening, do you have any real recollection of that explosion at your feet?
Oh yeah, yeah. That was a terrible thing. I remember everything. There was a little bit of yellow flame, but mostly black smoke. And everything went black. But what also, it knocked me out, which I didn't realize that for years.
I was just getting ready to ask if
you maintained a little bit of film showed up out of the grandstand, and it showed the car tumbling and my arms dangling out of the cockpit. I was unconscious just for a moment.
Wow. Did you think, was there ever a moment you go, I'm done with this, this is crazy?
No, and that's something.
It is.
I was so, my foot was blown off, and I was so pissed off. I said, I'm going to do something about this. And I'd sat in a couple of those cars, Bernie Shackler and Dwayne Ong's car. I'd actually sat in those engine cars at different tracks over in the East. And the visibility and all was just great, you know. And I thought, God, I don't know why nobody can make one of these things work. I said, and I had been to Indianapolis, the 500 in 1964, and I watched Jimmy Clark run behind Parnelli Jones all those last laps with oil coming out of that roadster, you know. And I thought to myself, they're going 200 miles an hour, and he's going around, maneuvering around in traffic on an oily track. Why can't we go a quarter of a mile straight?
Right.
It didn't make sense.
I mean, and what did you change?
It was just the ratio of the steering.
Really?
That's all it was.
Wow.
There was way too fast a steering in those slingshots. And I'm not so sure the slingshot itself needed that fast a steering. Probably didn't.
Who'd have thought? I thought you were going to tell me something about weight percentages or... No. Huh.
No. We worked for months on the back of the car, thought that's where the problem was. Something about the rear end or the way the torque of the motor, lifting one wheel, or all sorts of crazy stuff. I mean, we just constantly made changes in the back end. We had spools, we had pause attractions, we had Detroit lockers. We had less air in one tire, more air in the other.
Wow. And it was a steering ratio situation. It's
And
amazing.
and we were coming back after that we went to the track the next time after the wife got after me and went right off the drag strip. And we're coming back, and I was sitting over riding shotgun, and Swingle was driving, and TC was in the center of the pickup truck. And I had my hat down over my eyes, and I was just kind of talking out loud, thinking out loud. And I said, if I didn't know better, I'd think it was the steering. I said, you can hardly touch it, and it drives off the drag strip. But that can't be it, because that steering is on that car just exactly the way it came off the slingshot, which handles perfect. And old Swingle said, Gar, this ain't a slingshot. This is a front driver. If you think the steering's too fast, we'll just slow it down. So that night we made the arms on the spindles longer, and the arm on the little steering box that was up there was just the slingshot steering box turned sideways, made it shorter. We only moved it like from 6-to-1 to 10-to-1 steering. Went back the next day, and it went straight as a string. I couldn't believe it. But the good part was it went 686. And the Ram Chargers had just been there at that drag strip a few weeks before at a big event and held the strip record at 685. 100th off the Ram Chargers low ET.
Wow.
And we didn't even have a lot of nitro in it. We were just running like 75% trying to get from point A to point B. We couldn't get the stuff in the trailer fast enough and get to California.
Oh yeah, you're gonna go win a race, right? You're gonna. Oh my goodness.
Yeah.
Wow.
Exactly.
Wow. Unbelievable, Don. What a deal. Well, Don, I tell you what, I've had you on here for almost 2 hours, so I'm going to let you go. But
time flies when you're having fun, Wes.
That's right. Thank you so much, Big Daddy. I tell you what, I'll never, ever, ever, ever forget this. And we'll have to do this again. I think we could probably talk for another couple hours. Pretty easy.
Oh, I'm sure of it. We haven't even scratched the surface.
I know. Well, one more thing. Did you ever think that you'd go 300?
I'm not going anyplace.
Okay. Well, did you ever think you'd go 300 miles an hour? I mean, how much of a mission for you was it to go 300? Like,
I loved it. It's one of the highlights of my life, and I thank the Greek for giving me the prod, and I'd like to thank Gary Clapshaw for stepping up to the plate and loaning me his car, and all the team that helped me do that. They were all just super guys. And it was such a thrill. And when I got down to the end, I knew I'd went 300 because it was a nice ride. 303 it went that day. And what was so neat, the Greek was in the other lane, and he went 301. So had two old codgers went 300 miles an hour.
Side by side.
Yep. And then, of course, I later got my car out of mothballs and refurbished it, and Richard Hogan, and I put it up to 318 the first time at Indy, and then went 323 at Gainesville the following year.
Wow. And that's the fastest you've been, right?
Yeah. And on that, well, here's what a lot of people don't know also. On the 323 run, I did not lift at the quarter mile. I drove it another 200 feet because it was running so good and pulling so hard. And this, we record the speed of the car from the wheel speed on the front.
Right.
And the car actually reached 340 before I come off the throttle. And we come back, and the only thing wrong with it had one little bearing was smashed a little bit.
One bearing.
Yep. Doesn't hurt at all.
Wow. It's amazing. And you just legged it down through there because it was on a good one, huh?
Yeah, it felt good. And I thought, why should I lift? I mean, I want to see how it handles at a higher speed, because they were real concerned about my mono wing and everything.
Right.
And so, it was just nice. It was on one.
How much of when you look at the technology, I got two things I want to touch on real quick. It's talking about the mono wing and the structure of the cars. We're still seeing some cars breaking apart. We're still seeing some of that. What's your thoughts on the canopy and some people still electing not to run the canopy? What do you think about the Top Fuel canopy?
I think it's a must. It's a safety feature. It's one of the nicest things. When that water bug come in my car in 1985 and hit me in the face shield, it was a real impact up in Brainerd. And that's when I decided right then my next car was going to have a canopy, because what had been a bird, it would have killed you. It could break your neck at that speed. So that's when I decided it was definitely a safety feature. Probably not very much about aerodynamics, but the windshield, the tall windshields they have, probably pretty good on the aerodynamics. But it's a safety feature. And of course, then now the way they do it, it's even more safe than the way I was doing it, because they've got some really nice ways of fastening it on there and all. It becomes almost like a safety pod.
Right.
But
it's kind of surprising to me, though, that your first canopy was in the mid-'80s, right?
86.
86. So is it, 2.5 decades later or more, 3 decades later before it's...
Well, here's what's so funny. The Swamp Rat 34 is the most modern Top Fuel dragster in the world. You can look at it. It's right there in the museum, sitting right next to the Shirley car and the Lucas car. And there's no question in your mind that's a more modern car. Built in 93. Think about that. 93. And still nobody comes up to that. I will, in defense of the industry, I will have to say that NHRA didn't like the mono wing because the car on the 323 run gained 3 more miles an hour in the last half over any car up to that point in time.
Really?
So the mono wing definitely increases the car speed on the top end, which is exactly what they're trying to curtail.
Right.
But that was the wrong end of the horse to work on. They should have worked on the motors to slow them down, not the slickness of the car, because, see, the car being slick and giving you more speed doesn't hurt anything. It just causes you to be faster. But when you put more nitro in it, that hurts stuff. Or more boost.
Right. Tears, I got to ask, speaking of speed, what are your thoughts on the new, I mean, with your involvement in electric drag racing, you know, they just came out with this new Tesla Roadster last month that's capable of, like, I think single-digit quarter-mile times. I mean, they're saying it'll go the quarter mile in 8.9 seconds.
Yeah, and it's got a 250-mile-an-hour top speed.
I mean, I guess you're likely not, based on what your experience, you're likely not surprised by this at all.
No, I'm not.
Is this bad for drag racing, or is it good for drag racing?
Well, it's a two-edged sword.
Yeah.
There is places where this would be good. Englishtown, Pomona. If we had electric vehicles there, it would be better because the community don't like the noise, and they only allowed to run once in a while. With electric vehicles, it wouldn't bother anybody. But the sound has got a lot to do with the sport and the way the people love it. But as you well know, people adjust to different things over time, and they would adjust to the quieter cars. We're not always going to. Well, I'll say this for the record: we won't always be able to have nitromethane. I can tell you that right now. They're coming here. I'm going to look at my calendar. It's January the 9th. I'm going to get the big inspection from Homeland Security, and they'll tell me whether I can have nitromethane anymore or not. I don't know what they're looking for, but this, they're scared to death of the material.
Right. And for good reason, right?
Yeah, it's almost an explosive, and it can be made into an explosive real easy. And it's a shame that we live in a country and have allowed so many people to come here that hate it so bad.
It's hard to argue, Don. I mean, especially like, yeah, it's a odd state of affairs these days. It really is.
Yeah.
It really is. Well, I was wondering what you think about electric, because how fast have you been in the electric dragster? It's fast.
I've only been 185.6, but I've been 7.05.
That's what I thought.
And the
I knew it was bottom
the
sevens.
7.05 run would really have been good had it finished the run. It quit before it got to the end. It was going to go in the sixes. The electric motors are a strange beast. I'm not used to them. If you put more juice in them, they burn up. You got to use them the way they were designed. And the ones I got now are powerful, but they only go to 3,000. So I'm getting some new gears made. It's a Sidewinder, so it's actually sprockets. I use Harley-Davidson motorcycle chains. And getting some new gears, and they should just about be done. And that should give me 205 miles an hour with these motors. I got enough power to do it. The motors just won't stay with me down at the end. If I run them like they're supposed to do, it reaches its speed, and then it just goes, it just levels out. So I've got to get a gear in there so that the motors pull up to the speed right to the end.
Wow. It's crazy. You're always tinkering, Don. That's what I love about you. There's never going to settle.
That's what I like. That's what I like about the electric. I can do whatever I want. There aren't any rules. You just do whatever you want to do and experiment and play with. And of course, the electric excites me for another reason that you don't realize. My father was an electrical engineer, and he worked for Westinghouse, and he was on the 5-man team that invented the electric iron and the electric fan.
Really?
Yeah.
No, I had no
He
idea.
knew George Westinghouse personally, and George Westinghouse put him through electrical engineering school. He came to work at Westinghouse as a floor sweep out of high school.
That's unbelievable. I mean, to think about, yeah, it's got to feel good for you to kind of carry on that legacy, right? All these years later, to still be playing with electricity.
And wherever he's at watching me.
Unreal, unreal, Don. Well, I better let you go. I appreciate it. I really don't even know what to say. I just know that I'm so thankful, and I feel very blessed to know that there's going to be a record of our chat. Finally, I've wanted to do this for 10 years. I said, man, one of these days I got to get Don on the phone, and I got to record this instead of trying to just do a tidbit here or a snippet there. We need to have a conversation and record it. So I thank you so much. The first guest I've ever had on this new little podcast deal, and I'm gonna come.
Are you just going to run this like it is? How are you going to do it?
Just like it is. Just like it is.
Oh my God.
Oh my God. Just like it is. I'm not going to touch it at all. We're both going to be up to our elbows. So
yeah,
it'll be good though. Don't you worry, my friend. Don't you worry.
That's good. I love it.
All right. Well, hey, you stay out of trouble. Send my best to your better half, and let's talk again soon, Don. You have a Merry Christmas, my friend.
And same to you, and I enjoyed every minute of it. Thank you so much, Wes.
I'll never forget it, Don. Talk soon, my friend. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Wow.